This is the real Taliban. Okay, the New York Times, again, not conservative media, just posted this photo. There's a ballroom in Kabul. It is an event that was to commemorate all of those who carried out suicide attacks on our U.S. troops in the past 20 years. Haqqani of the Haqqani Network at the meeting promised to distribute land plots for the family so they'll get land of the suicide bombers. So you see this room full of men in their Taliban traditional garb. Look at the commandos. Look at their equipment. You see them in the back. You see a couple of those guys? They don't look like how the Taliban fighters looked like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, or 6 months ago. But they've got now sophisticated sophisticated equipment. Iran is now hosting this conference. I think these will be the first countries that recognize the Taliban government, and hoping the rest of the world comes and play. We have seen Russia multiple times, Andy, try to make the influence in Afghanistan. They're trying once again.
Jordan, I think your analysis is absolutely correct. There are some countries in that assembly that they are putting together and hosting that are, at least we thought, more dependent upon us than they are upon Russia, Iran, and China. But don't count on that. That might not necessarily be the case. When you look at Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, those countries may very well flip and go the way of the Iranians and the Chinese and the Russians. They don't have any particular commitment to the United States. They're in that region and they're under the influence of these bad actors. And when the Iranians are putting together a more inclusive regime, I mean, that makes me laugh. The Iranians are going to encourage the Taliban in Afghanistan to put together a more inclusive regime. Inclusive of what? Those that exclude women, those that break apart Western musical instruments, those that make women wear clothes over their face so that they're not seen. What's going to be inclusive about it? I think it's a joke, but it's something we need to take very seriously. It's a joke because it's laughable. What's laughable is that the Biden administration is doing nothing about it, whereas the Trump administration would have done something about it. I keep coming back to this. Where is our president? He is missing in action.
And our
He's
representatives
off the world stage.
And our representatives are leaving too. I mean, so then we have State Department, the IG. I think this is a good move. I mean, I don't know what we'll actually ever see from this report, but the Inspector General at the State Department has opened up an investigation into the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. But at the same time, the U.S. envoy to Afghanistan is gone. Now, whether they were thrown under the bus, it's a little unclear about it. And also whether or not they had a job to do anymore, considering we don't have an embassy there and we don't have any kind of interaction directly, I guess, very much with the Taliban. Though we're letting the world kind of take any gains we made there. And I think when Nathan used the word inclusive, though to us it is a joke that it's ridiculous. What they're trying to do is unite the tribes in Afghanistan, which has never really been done before. But you mentioned as well that photo represents the Taliban's version of pay for slay, the same kind of terrorist mindset that we're fighting in the Palestinian territories. The idea that if you carry out these attacks, suicide attacks, your family will be rewarded.
Yeah, they're just learning from Iran, Jordan. I mean, I don't think there's any accident. Look, they might not have the wealth or the dollars in volume that Iran has to pay for terrorists. Remember, that's something that we've been fighting here in the United States Congress. The Congress passed a bill. President Trump signed it into law saying that there would be no more funding for the Palestinians if they continued their pay-for-slay activity. Iran does this too, Jordan. They use proxies to pay people who commit acts of terror. Now you have the Taliban doing it. There's no doubt in my mind, Jordan, that at a conference like that, those are the ideas that are going to be pushed. But look, I circle back to the conversation you had with Secretary Pompeo earlier in the show. Yes, there are some countries that are maybe in this conference that Iran is hosting that have been traditional allies of the United States. But guess the United States isn't in that room, Jordan, and those countries need assistance. They need allies in the region. If we were either there or if we were not withdrawing from the region to such a magnitude, maybe they wouldn't be turning to Iran. But if the United States continues to advance a foreign policy of appeasement and Iran's willing to engage, Jordan, guess what? They're going to find an audience with some of these countries.
What do you make of, Harry, the IG opening up the investigation? I think we've seen a lot of good information come from these inspector general's reports. It sometimes leads to action. In this case, I think it will shed a lot of light. Because we do know there were a lot of State Department career officials who do good work, who were putting out warning signs. We saw from the intel community, the State Department community. Some of them were even signing on to the complaints publicly, even though they had a way to do those complaints without sharing your name and doing it anonymously. They were putting their names out there even days before the withdrawal. So it's obviously led to a inspector general who was outside the kind of pressures that the administration put on, and they're doing this just on the withdrawal. I mean, so it seems clear that at least there's some acknowledgement inside the apparatus of our government that things were not only wrong but totally botched.
I think that's correct. And so what we have is a chaotic, unthinking withdrawal from Afghanistan. And so I look forward to the Inspector General's report. The only caveat I would throw out is that will take some time. Often these investigations will last up to a year or longer. I think it's entirely necessary because the Biden administration has proven itself incapable of being held accountable, even by the low standards offered by the Obama administration. So I think the Biden administration has set a new low bar for competence. And I think Joe Biden in particular is an individual who has demonstrated on the world stage that he has yet to grow a backbone. And so I think at the end of the day, what we have done in Afghanistan and elsewhere is we have incentivized terror. We've incentivized Iran. We've incentivized China. We've incentivized the Taliban and other terrorist groups throughout the world to basically ramp up their activities because they don't expect a real response from President Biden. And I think their assessment is probably, unfortunately, accurate.
I want to put that photo back up from the ballroom because I think what's important here is you got to the symbolism as well. So those are the photos the New York Times was able to obtain. That is a ballroom in a hotel in Kabul, Intercontinental Kabul. That was targeted throughout these 20 years by those when you would hear the suicide bombings in Kabul outside of a hotel with Western journalists and Western government officials, that was the hotel. And that's the ballroom. So that what they are doing in that photo is not only celebrating those acts of terror and, as Than said, their own pay-for-slay program in their version of it, which is to give out land. They may not have, again, the financial resources to give money out, so they can still give land away. So that ballroom. But you also see there's a blurred face in one of those images. That is one of the Haqqanis running the network. So they are still keeping their terror wing very much under wraps to an extent. They're starting to show up at events. They're allowing the photographers to be there. They're blurring their face out. But that is who was running really the Taliban's relationship with Al-Qaeda, the Taliban's attacks on U.S. troops with suicide bombers, and of course even the 9/11 attacks and the other attacks we saw in our embassies on the USS Cole. That all comes from that network which is inside the Taliban, which focuses on terrorism. So again, you've got to understand the symbolism of that photo. Very important.